Hello, this is a quick tutorial to give you an idea of how a spreadsheet works. I am going to be using Google Sheets. Most of what I am going to say applies to pretty much any spreadsheet out there, e.g. Excel. I will be doing this using PC commands. The only difference really between that and a Mac is whenever I use the word control, substitute in command. I'm going to go over the very basics in this. If there is anything that I don't cover that you would like to see covered, please just let me know. Okay, so there's some basic terminology and functionalities that you will need to know before we get started. The individual parts of a spreadsheet are called cells. They are specified by a row number and a column letter. It is always row first, followed by column. In many things that we're going to do our operation on a range of cells. To do that, we need to first highlight them. Highlighting cells is easy. You just choose the cell where you wish to start. You hold down the Shift key and use the arrow keys to select the range. The range can be a column, it can be a row, it can be a grid, whatever you choose. Once you have highlighted a range or selected it, you can then perform operations on it. One of the ones that we will need a lot is we'll need to copy and paste and move data around. So I'm going to take this this column of data, and I'm going to copy it a few times. So I highlight it. I'm going to press Control C for copy. As you see, it brings up a perforated outline. To paste it, I can just move my cursor to whatever cell it is that I want, and I can paste it using Control V. If I want to paste it to multiple places, I can just keep doing that. Another operation that we're going to do with data sets on a regular basis, we're going to need to sort them into a usable order. So to do that, I am going to take this range here and I'm going to sort it. So the first thing I do is I highlight it. So hold down the Shift key and then use the arrows to complete the highlight. I go and choose data. I am going to choose sort range. All right. It will usually tell you what column you're in. A to Z will be in increasing order if it's numbers, or alphabetically if it's letters, and then vice versa in the other direction. We want it in increasing order. Once I do that, it sorts it. Handy things to know if there is ever a cell that you need to change the value of or work with what's inside it. If you hit F2, it will, as you can see, my cursor is now in the cell and I can edit this to whatever I want. I'll keep it as 6. All right. But the other thing to note is whenever you're on a cell, if you want to get a closer look at its contents, you can look here. This isn't so important right here, but when I've got, say, a formula, what's projected here is simply the sum of these numbers. All right, so what I see there is 55, but this gives me a look under the hood and I can see that it's actually summing a range of cells. Whenever you want the spreadsheet to do any sort of computation or apply a function or anything more convoluted than just look at a number, you have to tell it very specifically that's what you're going to do. In order for it to know that, you start any computation or any function that you're going to apply with an equal sign. After that, you put in whatever your function is and tell it what range to apply it to. So for example, I'm going to take the sum of these numbers. I know I just did that in this one. I'm just going to go for a little more detail. All right, so I start with an equal sign. I tell it that I'm going to take the sum. It will give you an autocomplete. We're almost always going to be using the first one. All right, it opens the range that you're going to be working with a parenthesis, and then you can just highlight the range. You can move your cursor, again, hold down your Shift key, highlight the range that you want, and then to tell it that you're done, you put a close paren and hit return, and it will tell you the result. Okay, as another example of doing this, we're going to take this column and we're going to square every entry. Now, the easiest way to do that is, again, you want to do a computation, so you start with an equal sign, and then you can just arrow over to this cell. Notice it puts the cell reference in, and I want to square it. Okay, now that's one. Once I've got one done, I can copy the formula and I can copy it to all of these cells. Hit Control V for paste. It will paste that formula in, and note it moves the reference. So I move down one, so it moved down one over here. And it does that all the way through. It'll naturally compensate for any adjustment needed as you move through a range of. As a final example, we could take the average of this column. I could do that using formula. I could find the sum of the numbers. That tells me 55. And so therefore my average, well, it would be this number divided by, indicated with a slash, and then the number of objects in the list, which are 10. All right. Alternatively, I could use the average. Highlight the range, close it out, enter, and there it is. Okay, so next let's compute a variance and a standard deviation. We're going to assume that this is a sample. All right, now, first things first, we're going to have a look at the formula for it. Okay, so the formula we're going to use for the variance is this, and remember that the standard deviation is just the square root. Now, when there's a lot going on, I strongly suggest do it one term at a time and then combine it piece by piece. It goes much smoother. So we're going to need the squares. We're going to need to sum those up. We are going to need to sum the x values and square those. So we've got a few manipulations to do to begin with. All right, so let's do that. Okay, so going back to our spreadsheet. All right, I'm going to label things so I can keep everything straight. That will be my x column. This will be my x squared column. So again, I need to square every entry. So I'm going to take that entry and square it, and then copy that, Control V, to all of those cells. All right, now I need to sum them. So I will use the command sum, highlight this range, close parenthesis, and that gets me that sum. So this is the sum of my x's, and then I'm going to get the sum of my x squared. All right, so if we go back to the formula for the variance, my numerator is the sum of the squares minus the sum of the x's whole thing squared divided by my sample size. Okay, so let's do this in two steps. Let's do the numerator. Okay, so it's going to be the sum of my squares, so 385, minus this number, the sum of my x's squared, divided by my sample size, 10. All right, my denominator, in this instance, there's not much to do in the denominator. It's just one less than the sample size. So I'm going to say it is 9. Okay, so my variance is my numerator divided by my denominator. Okay, my standard deviation. Remember, the standard deviation is the square root of the variance. So to do that, the command, again, I start with an equals, and then the command for square root is sqrt, open paren, choose that value, and out comes my standard deviation. All right, so now as a final example, let's compute the correlation coefficient. All right, again, there is a lot going on in here, so we'll break it up into pieces and then eventually compute the whole thing. Okay, but just as with the standard deviation, I'm going to need my squares and the sum of the squares. I'm going to need that for both x and for my y variables. And I'm also going to need their product. Okay, so let's start by getting those. All right, I will, oops, not sum. All right, I'm going to take the x squareds, so I will take this and square it. And again, I will copy that. All right, then I will do the same thing here. Square that and copy it. I should point out that when all is said and done, when we compute the correlation coefficient, it should be 1, or sorry, it should be -1. There's a perfect negative correlation just because these numbers are so perfect. Okay, to get x times y, I'm going to do similarly. I'm going to take this cell. I want to multiply it, so I use an asterisk by that cell. And then I copy it all the way through. Okay, so again, I'm going to break this into parts. I am going to find my numerator, and then I'm going to find, okay, so I'll find my numerator term. Then there's a part that's basically in x and a part that's basically in y, and I'm going to compute those two separately and then put the whole thing together. Okay, so my numerator, I start off with n times the sum of the x times y's minus the sum of x times sum of y. Well, first thing I better do is find a bunch of sums because I haven't done that. Okay, so I will take the sum of these. Okay, now I can use the fact that it will move my cell references as I copy the formula. So rather than doing a sum for each one of these, I can take this formula, copy it, and then paste. And each one of those will give me the sum of the range above it. Okay, one thing I can do to double check that, I said when you use F2, it will give you the option to edit the cell. It will also allow you to trace the formula. So I've hit F2, it's showing me the cell, and it's highlighted the range that the sum is being applied to. So if you're ever uncertain, you can check it that way. Okay, so for my numerator, oops, I need 10 times the sum of the xy's, which is 220, minus the sum of the x's, which is 55, times the sum of the y's, which is also 55. And that gets me my numerator. All right, for my denominator in x, all right, I need the square root of the sum of n times the sum of the squares minus the sum squared. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this interior part first, and then I'm going to apply the square root. All right, so I need 10 times the sum of, 10 times the sum of the squares minus the sum squared. That gets me that. Okay, so now what I will do, I could make a new cell here and say, all right, take that square root. Okay, the other thing I could do, and that's what I'm going to prefer, I'm just going to take this one and I'm going to edit it, and I will add in the square root part. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same thing for the y's. Okay, I will compute this interior part first, and then I will add the square root later to make certain it's clear. Okay, So I take 10 times the sum of squares minus the sum squared. Okay. And then I am going to edit that and add in the square root and close that with a parenthesis. Okay, so now I'm ready to compute R. To compute R, it is this numerator divided by, now I'm going to multiply two things. I need to group them together using parentheses in the denominator. So it will be negative 825 divided by this times that. All right, my denominator in X times my denominator in Y. And as I said, I get -1 because it's a perfect negative correlation. Okay, I will cut it off there. Those are most of the operations that we're going to need, namely taking a value, sorting it, squaring it, summing it up, possibly combining the squares and the individuals. If there are other things that you would like to see, by all means, just please ask me. I'd be happy to show you.